But I think it's a mistake to suppress these emotions. If they're within you, they're part of you, they're natural. Don't hide them, don't lock them away. Open that trapdoor and let them out. Let them manifest themselves. Become the real you. Don't hide away these emotions, all these feelings that you've got. Let them free. Embrace it. Become your own inner id. Allow it to break free from the confines, the shackles of your own emotional self. Please, there's a world out there of experience. Go out there and enjoy it. Have fun. Be frivolous. Be adventurous. Be spontaneous. And don't worry about injections and potions and lotions. I find that just a large whiskey will do the trick. And I think, oh, I thought this was a private session. Kilt-Man here, Kilt-Man, at your services. How are you all? Hope you're doing very well. Better than my young patient here, who has so many psychological problems. It's just a hopeless case, really. 1971 saw Amicus, the friendly face of horror, release their version of Robert Louis Stevenson's celebrated and oft-filmed novella, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, under their title of I, Monster. Yeah. Perhaps to differentiate themselves from the slew of other adaptations which have been out since the start of cinema. Many groundbreaking films there were too. So, what was meant to be a very faithful reworking of Robert Louis Stevenson's original novella, and it actually is, all it does differently, apart from change the title and change the names of the main characters, but it moves the story ahead in time a little bit. So instead of, like I was talking about potions there, the elixir that Dr. Jekyll drinks, which transforms him into Mr. Hyde, his demonic, brutalistic alter ego, his inner self with no inhibitions. It's not a drink anymore, it's an injection. Yes, it's a syringe. In you go. Take a shot, a jab in the arm, and it transforms you. Now, that may well be because when the film was made, 1970, released in 71, of course, you had drugs and psychedelia and all that kind of thing. So it might have been a little sort of, a nod and a wink to the current film-going generation. Possibly, who knows. But also, it had moved ahead in time because they were adapting the ideas of Freud. Why? Because Milton Subotsky, who was the head chief of, one of the double act that ran Amicus, along with Max J. Rosenberg, he'd written the screenplay, and his wife just happened to be a psychologist. So Freud was very big on the breakfast table. So that's why the film has lots and lots of little moments of Christopher Lee, the great Christopher Lee, who plays Dr. Marlowe, not Dr. Jekyll. And Dr. Jekyll does not become, this Dr. Jekyll doesn't become Mr. Hyde. Mr. Marlowe becomes Mr. Blake. Why? Why be that then? If you're telling a faithful version of the story, why change the integral names of that central dichotomy of dual personality? Why do that? Why swap that around? Milton Subotsky actually said that the reason was that if it called it Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, everybody knows the punchline. Everybody knows the big shock revelation that the killer, the brutish Mr. Hyde, really is Dr. Jekyll. Yeah, well, we know, of course we know that. That didn't stop any other filmmaker from doing his interpretation of it. It's just how you tell the story. It's how you get to that, revelation moment. Just knowing it from the outset doesn't alter the trajectory of the story, especially if you're going to tell it faithfully, which, to a large extent, Subotsky's screenplay and the film, directed by the exceptionally young at the time Stephen Weeks, he was 22, folks, 22, helming an adaptation of a gothic literary masterpiece. For a big studio, Amicus was huge at the time. Not quite Hammer, but they were huge in their own right. And not only was he working from a a classic piece of horror literature for a great horror movie production stable, but also he was going to have to shepherd not only Christopher Lee, but Peter Cushing as well. The two titans of terror. For the last couple of decades, they'd ruled supreme. So how is he going to do that? How did he even get the gig in the first place? He got the gig because Christopher Lee had seen a short film of his, which he'd done while still at school, believe it or not, called 1917, and was so impressed with it, he brought the name forward. So Milton Subotsky went, okay, we'll give him a shot. So long as you follow my script, and so long as you do something else for me as well. You paint the canteen at the studios. Huh? What? Stephen Weeks came in at the weekend one time and discovered that the whole canteen, the staff canteen, which was quite large, was being repainted, and discovered that it was a production company that was paying for this to be done, chipping into their budget somewhat. Wasn't too happy about that. No, the major thing that perhaps caused a lot of on-set friction was Milton Subotsky had this thing, the Pilfrich idea of 3D, which was an early 3D angle, which was not going to be using, fantastic camera lenses. It wasn't going to be a camera thing at all. The cameras were just going to move a certain way and have the cast moving certain ways. But the idea would be the viewer would watch the film, the finished film, which would be flat, but they'd be wearing a pair of sunglasses with one lens taken out. And the effect of that, apparently it does work. Well, it can work. It didn't in this case though. Oops-a-daisy. You have the central cast moving from left to right, or is it right to left? I don't know. So they'll be in the foreground, no, the background, moving left to right, and the personal object in the foreground will be moving the other way, and the camera will track the opposite way. So the way the light works with this, I sound like I know what I'm talking about, don't I? It's all psychology. You'll learn from me. And the way it works, you will get a sense of depth from it. Stephen Weeks worked out it doesn't work, and this caused a lot of problems between him and Milton Subotsky. Subotsky has said afterwards many times, I gave him the cameras, I gave him acres, miles of film to use, and I showed him and told him what to do, and he still couldn't do it. He was too young, too inexperienced. You hired him for the job. It couldn't be done. No one thought it worked. No one thought it looked any good. Even the finished article, when viewed like rushes of it, and Subotsky would be there going, oh, that looks wonderful, that's brilliant, that looks fantastic. Everyone else is going, it's not in 3D. It's not 3D at all. In fact, it's giving me a splitting headache just looking at it, but it certainly isn't 3D. Anyway. And also the fact that Stephen Weeks was so young, cameramen and other operators on the set were like realising, my son is older than you. So they resented him for it as well. And that's not a happy working environment really, is it? Especially when you're an up-and-coming film director who's got a big gig and suddenly he's got a lot to prove, and this really could have been the makings of him. Sadly it wasn't. But you can't lay any blame at his feet, because he accomplishes quite a bit with what is a very, very short, very bleak, very mean-spirited, completely humorless movie. Christopher Lee playing Dr. Marlowe, a psychologist, psychoanalyst from the Freud school of thought, has developed an injection, a serum, which can release someone from their own inhibitions. So a repressed woman will suddenly, who's scared of her own shadow, upon the injection, will suddenly become a lascivious, wanton sex fiend, a nymphomaniac harlot, but then he has the remedy as well to bring them back to normal. A totally arrogant, boorish businessman, very, authoritarian, can be calmed down completely and become a whimpering coward until he gets the antidote. So of course, Marlowe's beginning to think, well, because Marlowe's very cold, very straight-laced, completely clinical, very efficient, no emotion whatsoever. He's an automaton, really. Starched, very wooden. So he takes the injection himself, and of course, it unleashes straight away a big rictus grin on his face. He looks around at laboratory equipment. Excuse me. He starts playing around with the Bunsen burner, looking at glasses and tubes and bell jars, looking at the animals that he has there. Oh, it's all very strange, isn't it? I don't see the point of all this. Goes out on the streets. Suddenly discovers a whole amount of liberation and freedom. A smile, a spring in his step. With each successive injection that he has, he becomes increasingly uglier to look at. And ugly on the outside, ugly on the inside. More bestial, more brutal, more repugnant. He starts stealing, he'll commit violence, he'll commit murder. But the more and more that he has these transformations, the uglier and more monstrous he becomes. He realises what's going on, but it doesn't matter. He's going to transform all the more, and it just drives him to the brink of absolute wanton murder, destruction. So that's Christopher Lee. Peter Cushing, you heard me mention. He's barely in it. To be perfectly honest, he is barely in it. He's just a supporting character. But he is a character from the original novella. He plays an attorney who I think is Marlowe's lawyer. In the book, he's the narrator. But in this, he's just an onlooker from the sidelines. He's a member of the gentleman's club that Marlowe frequents, along with other staid and very, forthright, conservative, well-to-do, well-heeled prats, including Mike Raven. Yes, Mike Raven, the Roger Delgado lookalike of the era. He was in things like The Crucible of Terror. He was in Hammer's Lust for a Vampire. Hammer had the foresight to overdub him because this ex-radio DJ from pirate radio as well, he may have had the perfect voice for radio, but it did not translate well in a movie. And it was him that had the bright idea, I've got such a personality and charisma, I should be in movies. So he made the leap into movies via a lot of connections. He's not very good though. And Lust for a Vampire and this kind of sealed his doom, and then he went on to do a Crucible of Terror and I think something of Death, Doctor of I don't know what it was, but they were vanity projects. And then he sort of exit stage left, and he's not very good in this at all. His voice, his look, his mannerisms, and he's given a huge piece of expositional dialogue about the famous brutal stamping of a young child, which Mr. Hyde will commit in the novella and every other film version, but it'll be Blake who does it in this. But Mike Raven's character will tell Peter Cushing all about this, and we should have just seen it properly. Don't tell us it. You've just completely destroyed an epic moment in horror. But be that as it may, Peter Cushing still is dependable, and he's almost only in this so that you can get a final moment where he will square off and have to tussle and fight with Christopher Lee for what, the 6th or 7th or maybe 8th time. And the film itself, it's Christopher Lee's show. But as you watch it, I've always said, I always say and always maintain that of the two, and the two have made many movies separately, but they are forever linked. They were very, very close friends, besotted friends, and they will be forever, cemented as a duo, as a team. But of the two, Peter Cushing is by far the most versatile. Christopher Lee always plays authoritarian, noble, regal, royal, aristocratic. The only times I can think of when he didn't would be playing the monster in Curse of Frankenstein. What else? Rasputin the Mad Monk, although there was a monumental ego trip on that one as well. Maybe the Mummy for Hammer, Carice. But beyond that, everything else he's played, be it Dracula, be it the Duke de Richelieu. No, it's not the whiskey doing it. But Saruman, Lord Summerisle, anything he played, even a walk-on part in the great film Deathline, where he plays a government minister. He's in it for like all of 5 minutes, and he is such a toff. That's Christopher Lee. So when he plays Dr. Marlowe, he is literally devoid of emotion. He's completely characterless. And the first sort of, 10 minutes, maybe more, before the first transformation, it's actually difficult to watch. It's like he is just playing the archetypal version of himself with absolutely no emotion, completely deadpan, and with that horrific sort of little floppy side part, which really doesn't look right on him. And you're like, oh, this is just annoying. He's getting on my nerves. And then he has the little injection, and I say this big grin and all that, and suddenly he gets a personality, a spring in his step. He smiles, he laughs, he's all over the show, and he lights the film up then. A film that is very gloomy, very dark. The sets are great, the sets are immaculately and handsomely mounted. The rather minuscule exterior sets on the streets, the cobbled streets of old London, the bars and taverns, they are limited, but they look good for what they are. And that gloom, that grit, the soot in the air, the smog, it's all definitely there. And him traipsing around with a cane that he's seen them in the window of a shop, and he just punches through the glass and just takes the one he wants. He causes fights on the streets, and he's a joy to behold. Sadly, as the film transpires and the more and more transformations he has, as Blake, he will take he'll rent a room somewhere away. So when he goes out on his rampages, he's got somewhere to go back to finally calm down and have it shoot up again and go back to normal and sneak in the back door of his well-to-do doctor's offices. And but picking fights and all sorts of stuff. If you look at some of the extras, the great Ian McCulloch is there in the bar. He's from Zombie Flesh Eaters, Zombie Holocaust, awesome stuff. He's in there. Leslie Judd from Blue Peter is in there, which is kind of ironic because if you just go back about 3 or 4 videos that I did, I was discussing Flash Gordon quite extensively. And in Flash Gordon, you had the young Peter Duncan, another presenter from Blue Peter. So there's how many Blue Peter presenters got themselves into genre movies? Not that many, I can tell you. And suddenly there's 2 out of the blue. So there's actually a razor fight in the street. He sees a young couple, one of which is Leslie Judd, against the wall, canoodling. And he can't resist but to shoulder barge going past with his top hat on and his big grin on his face. And the lad's like, hey, don't do that again. But later on when he comes past with his cane, he will do it again. And the lad just turns around, whoosh, got a switchblade on him. Come on then. So a fight ensues. Now Christopher Lee is he's a great sword fighter. The guy is very athletic. Doesn't tend to give that away by just walking very regally everywhere he goes and just standing there as Dracula, just with the fingers and the mesmers there. But he's a very physical and athletic, and got a lot of prowess. And he manages to sidestep this guy and trip him up with his cane and flip the guy over. And then the fight ensues, and he's got a needle. He's going to jab him with the needle. And it's a great spirited moment of complete darkness and depravity. There is a killing later on of a harlot in the bar who, in one of those tracking shots I mentioned, he's chatting her up. Well, rather, he's not. He's just listening to her, who's chatting him up. And then they move across the bar to one end. And then another fella approaches and says something like, what are you doing with him? You're walking out with me, remember? And then she goes, with him? I won't go with one as ugly as him. And everyone in the pub turns around and begins to laugh at him. Stephen Weeks has claimed that Christopher Lee was actually against what everyone thought was a very shy man, hiding behind a facade of aristocracy and professionalism. He was actually very shy, and he didn't want to do that part. He didn't want to play that scene. He was terrified of playing it, of having people laughing at him, until he got in the character of Blake. And hiding behind Blake, he could go through with the scene, he could take it. And the weird thing is that Blake himself doesn't take it. Blake doesn't like what's happening, and he will, he'll run out, go back to his little garret where he's staying, this hovel. But he will wait until closing time, and he'll look out the window, and that girl does not walk out with that fella. She walks the streets on her own. So he goes after her, pursues her, and he clubs her to death with that cane that he nicked as well. And it's quite a vicious sequence. But this comes back to this whole thing about Christopher Lee being so aristocratic and regal. Anyway, his demeanour. And I think I can believe what Stephen Weeks has said about that. About Christopher Lee not wanting to do that part, because in all of his roles, he never gets ridiculed, he never gets laughed at. He's the one in command. He's always playing an authoritative figure, someone completely in control and powerful. So to have that turned on him, he must have thought, that's never happened before. I can't do this. I don't want people laughing at me. So I can see the relevance of that sequence and understand what was going on there. But the film has an interesting score as well by Carl Davis, the great Carl Davis, conductor and composer, working with the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic. And it's whimsical, it's playful, it's gothic, it's brooding, it's sprightly in some cases, because when he becomes Blake, things become more upbeat, at least initially anyway. Then they become more sadistic and darker. You've also got one of the opening shots. You see a two-headed baby in a jar of formaldehyde. Apparently, that's a real artifact. You've also got some animals in his laboratory. He injects a cat first of all, and the cat goes completely bizarre. Starts knocking all the jars and bottles off the top and hissing at him, and it goes to him. And in the end, he has to club his own pet cat to death. And he's like, "Oh God, what have I done there?" He's also got a monkey in a cage. If you peruse down the cast list, a certain Percy Edwards. Is it Percy Edwards? Oh, let me have a little look here. Percy Edwards, yeah. It's actually says uncredited there, but he does the animal sounds, animal voices, because he used to do animal shows on kids' TV where he would pretend to be a parrot or a penguin or whatever, and he would talk like them and make the noises that these animals make. So they actually employed him to do the voice of the cat and the voice of this little monkey. Oh, that's a great little anecdote. You've got Blue Peter and you've got Percy Edwards in there. Tremendous stuff. Even though there's killings in the film, and the film has a very dark, brutal edge to it, the killings are not explicit. You really don't see much at all. A lot of it's implied. The trampling of the child, you just mainly hear about that. You just see a very vague image of it, but it doesn't linger any of the violence. The fight at the end, the climactic fight between Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee. Christopher Lee's lying in wait for him, and Peter Cushing has realised, because he's begun to put two and two together and realise that, because they're friends as well. Because I know this Blake character's been staying in the same apartment as my friend Marlowe. He initially thinks that Blake's been blackmailing Marlowe and has got something on him, and Marlowe is using Blake as he's the culprit, but he's gone now. Don't worry about him, he's gone now. But Peter Cushing doesn't really believe any of this, and Marlowe understands it and writes a note for himself when he becomes Blake again that he knows. So Blake will read that and then go after him. So even though he despises what Blake's doing, he quite clearly is still looking after number one, even though number one is kind of split into two halves. So Blake goes after Peter Cushing, and they have a fight in this room, and the room goes on fire. Blake tries to throw Peter Cushing out of a window, and you see the camera pans down, and there's some railings with spikes on them, and you're thinking, oh yeah, what's going to happen is Peter Cushing's going to throw Christopher Lee over the top, and he's going to land on the spikes. No, Doesn't happen. Christopher Lee just gets pushed away and his big cape goes on fire, and then he struggles about, walks out the room, falls down the stairs and dies at the foot of the stairs. When you watch it, Peter Cushing comes out and you're thinking, there's a close-up before Peter Cushing sees him of Blake lying there, eyes shut, and you're thinking, come on, it's going to be a jump scare, his eyes are going to open again. They don't. And then you think, okay, maybe it's going to be a bit of a Donald Pleasance, Dr. Loomis and Michael Myers sort of thing. As Peter Cushing gets to the top of the stairs, looks down, the body won't be there, the door will be open. Yeah, no, he's still lying there. And in a rather half-hearted dissolve, he begins to morph with photographic time-lapse into his normal face. Because throughout the transformations, he's become relentlessly unappealing. He's got these ridiculous, big, massive comedy teeth. Like that. Huge. And a big putty nose. And lots of warts have appeared all over his face. You know, he might go out to have fun. He's got no inhibitions, but no one's going to go fucking near him. He's an ugly spud, you know. So, and the makeup isn't that good either. Christopher Lee inhabits it really well. He gives a zeal to that performance, but the makeup kind of lets him down. It just looks stupid. And with the top hat as well, he kind of looks a bit like Lon Chaney Sr. from London After Midnight, the famous Lost movie London After Midnight. I've got the mask of it. I did show you it. You can find a video where I discussed that movie quite extensively with the top hat and the wonderful mask. On that note, I've got pictures of Christopher Lee trying on his big stupid fake dentures with a few warts on his face and his hair slicked back. There's an identical photo of Lon Chaney Sr. putting in, I'm not sure what film it's for though, he's got warts on his face, his hair slicked back, and he's putting in fake teeth. It's almost identical. I love these little symmetrical connections throughout the genre. So, I, Monster. It's received a fabulous release from Powerhouse Indicator, full of extras and commentary tracks and lots of little featurettes and all that sort of thing. A little booklet, limited release. It's worth getting. The film is not great. You've got the two cuts of the film on there, the shorter one which saw the initial theatrical release, but you're not, all that does is tighten things in. And I think the extended version, it's only like 5 minutes or so, actually does benefit from having the Freudian spiel and some of these more elaborate camera tracking shots, which don't do it any harm. The fact that it was meant to be in 3D, if you didn't know that, you wouldn't expect it. Things don't go popping out the screen at you. The Bunsen burner, which when his first transformation, he waggles around right in the camera at you. In a normal 3D film, that'd be just poked straight out at you. In this, he moves it around from side to side. And that would have been the 3D effect, supposedly. But it doesn't do any harm to the film. It just adds a bit of cinematic elegance as well to a film which is downbeat, a film which is grim, and dark, dour and gloomy. And it's got Mike Raven in it as well. Loving your work, Mike, loving your work. Great face for radio. But I, Monster. Silly title. Yeah, I don't quite get the gist of why they changed the names, because otherwise you have got one of cinema's most faithful literary adaptations. Should have just stuck with that. Just gone with it. But I've done no harm. Amicus made far greater movies, some of which I've covered as well. And, you know, their portmanteau anthology movies are peerless, they're excellent. And of course, The Beast Must Die, one of my all-time favourite werewolf movies. God, if someone would just give me the rights to that movie, I'd remake that. I don't like remakes, only very few films benefit from the remake process. But that one, if you could go far with that, I've got ideas for that one. But yeah, Christopher Lee makes this movie without a doubt, and he's much more fun as Blake than he is as Marlowe. Peter Cushing, he's there, and for the meagre screen time that he gets, he's brilliant, but you just know he's on the sidelines, And although Christopher Lee never wanted to put himself down, never wanted to self-denigrate, he actually did say, I gave one of my best ever performances. Peter Cushing, on the other hand, has said many times, like, that was one of the worst experiences of my life. It certainly wasn't one of the better films I've ever made. He's honest about it. But as I said before, time's been kind to this movie, and to watch it now with revisionist eyes, its lack of action, its verbosity, its pomposity as well, it can be more appreciated, I think, now. Anyway, folks, I have been, and always shall be, a psychoanalyst in his spare time. Please, be happy, be healthy, be safe, keep it kilted, keep it Celtic, never be in two minds about anything. And we are going to see you all later. Time to shoot up, hey Kentucky.